Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the Landlord Services Board. My name is Councillor Paul Follows and I'm leader of the council. I am chairing this meeting as Councillor Paul Rivers, the portfolio holder for housing, unfortunately has to go to another event this morning. And I think it's a good opportunity for me to chair the Landlord Services Board, so I'm taking it with open arms. I'm joined, of course, as ever, by the chair of the tenants panel, Terry Dorman. Thank you. Good morning. Before we start, I'm just going to ask if everybody could quickly introduce themselves. I think I know nearly everybody here, but I just want to make sure I don't get anybody's name or role wrong, because you definitely don't want me pointing around going, "Can you over there? Can you speak?" So I'd rather try and address everybody by name. So we can go round from the back row, so that I've got everybody on the list.
Dave Madams, Riverside Court Tenants Panel.
Danielle Slightome, co-optee of the Tenants Panel.
Joe Warren, Tenant Involvement Officer.
Alan Morrison, Councillor for Cranleigh West.
Rob Stratford, member of the Landlord Advisory Board, Vice Chair of the Tenants Panel, Treasurer of the Tenants Panel and Oxford Ridge Redevelopment Committee.
Amy Hardy, Service Improvement Officer.
Jonathan O'Neill, Service Improvement Officer.
Amy Walton, Service Improvement Officer.
Jordan Dadsey, Graduate Housing Management Trainee.
Candice Keats, Senior Accountant.
Annalisa Howson, good morning everybody, Housing Service Improvement Manager.
I'm Leila Manzo, I'm a Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you, everyone. So starting with the first part of the agenda, Leila, apologies for absence, please.
Thank you. I have received apologies from Councillor Paul Rivers, Councillor, who's the other one? Oh, sorry, I have it in front of me. Sorry. Script. Right, sorry. Councillor Rubini, Councillor Keane, Councillor Rivers, and Sally Purcell from the Tenants Panel, as well as Chris Austin from the Tenants Panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Leila. Any declarations of interest from anybody in the room? Any received before the meeting, Leila?
No, they were non-received.
Okay, and notes from the last meeting. Can I have your agreement of the minutes of the 29th of November? Any issues with them? Nope. Okay, Leila, there's a comment here that there might be some follow-up on a number of matters from the minutes. As the chair is here, is there anything you needed to add?
Now that you caught me out, Paul, no, we did, Terry and I did raise up one or two issues at our pre-meeting, but I think they're all covered. Is that right, Terry?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Terry. Questions from members of the public? Any received, Leila?
None received, Chair.
And questions from members?
No questions from members.
Okay. Right, item 6 then is by far the main event of the session, which is the HRA budget proposals, which I'm going to hand over to Candice, and then of course I will open it up for comments, starting with Terry and then round the room. So Candice.
So we have got a presentation which is about to be shared. Great. Yeah, you can do a little intro. Yeah.
Okay, so lovely to see you here this morning. I understand the Tenants Panel already had a review of the I was going to say literature, but it's more numbers, isn't it? The housing revenue account, as you know, is tenants' rent money to be spent on tenant services, and every year we go through the budget setting process to identify what we need to do in the coming year, and also we have a 30-year business plan. So we don't just think about the next year, we think about the future years as well. So as you know, the HRA and General Fund we did a session back in December, so they're not separate legal entities, but the HRA is ring-fenced. And those of you who know me and have seen me speak at various events, you know I'm very passionate about making it very clear that tenants' rent money is spent on tenant services to people living in our homes. And as we said, most of the money coming into the HRA is from tenants' rent, and we deliver other services. I don't think we've all seen this before, just to give you an indication, a reminder of where the tenants' rent money is predominantly spent. As you see, in 2012, we self-financed coming out of the government rent regime, and we took out a debt of 189 million, which we now need to service over the next 20 to 30 years. But the majority of your rent then goes on the operational management costs. So that's all the services, and the teams who are delivering the services. And then you can see the money that's spent on the actual repairs to the homes as well. So 20p in the pound on responsive repairs and empty homes, and 16p in the pound in 22-24 on programmed works. And what we really want to do is shift that, so we're spending a bigger proportion of money on programmed maintenance, so homes are in a good condition, and reduce that responsive, reactive repair service that we're delivering. When we had our training session back in December, if you remember, before Christmas, we talked about the external factors that had an impact on the housing revenue account. So we've got the microeconomics. We all know inflation has been rising at an incredible rate. We're going through a cost of living crisis. And we've also seen a change in demand, and a big change with the legislation and regulation that's coming through. You're all aware of the Social Housing Regulation Act, and the fact that come the 1st of April, the regulator of social housing will be monitoring all social landlords with over 1,000 homes to make sure that they are adhering to their consumer standards. And then the other big external factor that we had was issues with rent. So you may remember that we had 4 years of rent decrease. So we did self-financing in 2012. We set out a lovely HRA business plan for the next 20 years. And then the government decided that we couldn't increase rents as we had forecast. And in fact, we had rent reduction for 4 years, which took out a lot of money immediately from the HRA business plan and had an impact on the long-term future of that. When that happened, we reduced our capital works and programmed works. And I think sometimes we're seeing the fallout of that. And just to highlight, before we get into the detail of the money coming in and the money going out, just remember the competing challenges we have. So every rent pound we get in, we've got lots of different teams pulling for that money. We need to make sure homes are safe. I mean, that's a fundamental, obviously. We need to keep your homes in repair. We need to make sure we're adhering to all the regulatory standards. We want to continue to improve our services. That we've then got the factor of decarbonisation, making sure homes are energy efficient. Within social housing as a sector, there's a real balance being played out between building safety and decarbonisation, and where's the first port of call on the money that's coming in. We want to make sure that our homes are affordable, and we also need to continue to develop new homes. And I will now pass you over to Candice for the detail.
For the fun bits, we're on to numbers now. So contained within the business plan currently, we are forecasting 4.5% for inflation. Then you may have heard recently that inflation's gone down, but then we just had the recent release where it went back up. So this is really covering for any uncertainties as well. It is currently at 4%, but we're forecasting a 4.5% for 24-25. And this is going to impact a lot of the budgets, basically, across staffing, repairs, maintenance, IT, and that's going to have an impact on our budget by £1 million. So we need to grow our budget by £1 million just to cover inflation for 24-25. Go on to the next one. Thank you. So talking about our major repairs, so the opening budget last year, the current year was 9.8 million, and it's a similar level for next year at 9.6 million. With continued increases on heating system upgrades, critical replacements and fire safety works. So in terms of rent, the budget for the current year is 31.3 million. The standard rent increase, which you've probably heard before, is CPI in September plus 1%. That's the maximum we can go to. So September CPI was 6.7%, which gives us a maximum increase of 7.7%. And that is our proposal for 24-25. And the 7.7% is going to result in additional income of 2.1 million. So if you remember last year, government capped the rent increase that we could do at 7%, but we were actually able to offer a 4%, so even less than the government cap. And that was in recognition of the cost of living crisis. But you'll see throughout this presentation all the factors that have come in that have knocked us off the path of trying to keep rent increases as low as possible. So we move to the next slide. So another complication for 24-25 is a 53-week rent year, and that's because there are 53 Mondays in 24-25, and that's the day that your rent is charged. So for the majority of tenants, there's going to be no impact whatsoever, but those that receive universal credit will be impacted by this change. So universal credit will only take your weekly rent amount and times it by 52. So for those tenants on universal credit, they will need to pay that remaining week out of pocket. And we recognise that this is going to be hard for a number of those tenants. So that's about 30% of our tenants that receive part or full universal credit. So what we've proposed within the 24-25 budget is to increase our hardship fund to £200,000, which would mitigate the impact for those tenants affected. So if they do find themselves in hardship as a result of that change, they can come to Waverley and we're able to help support them. So in terms of some different options and how they impact the bottom line of the business plan, we've got up on the screen 6%, 7% and our proposed 7.7%. So the additional income for 6% is 2.1 million. It goes up to 2.5 million for 7% and then up to 2.7 for 7.7%. The biggest impact this is going to have across our business plan is how much we need to borrow. And we will talk about it a bit more in the presentation, but what we discovered in our review in December 2022 was that our current debt repayment plan was unaffordable. What we were trying to do was to avoid having to borrow in 24-25 additional borrowing because of the high cost of borrowing. And we haven't managed to achieve that, but what we're now aiming to do is to keep that figure as low as possible, because each extra pound we have to borrow, we have to pay a high amount of interest on. So at 7.7%, we're going to have to borrow 2.3 million to cover the other costs within our business plan. If we were to go at 7%, it would be 2.5 million, and 6%, 2.8 million. Now, the bigger impact it will have is when you see it across the whole of the business plan. So our proposal of 7.7% sees additional borrowing requirement of 23 million. But when we go to 6%, that jumps up by £5 million to 28 million. Now, the cost of servicing that debt, so the interest payment on an additional 5 million, is substantial. So that is the reason that we're trying to keep that number as low as possible. So in terms of how that will impact the average tenant, the weekly amount that we would see an increase by on 7.7% is £11.36, down to £8.85 at 6%.
Has everybody had time to absorb those figures?
So another major item that's within the budget report is service charges. So the senior living facilities and a few other facilities across receive a service charge and a utility charge. So utility costs, obviously, over the past few years have doubled. And what we committed to in the 23-24 report was to do a full review of those service charges. And what was found was that for the service charges and the utility charges, Waverley were under recovering by £388,000. So that means rent payers are having to subsidise paying for those bills, those utility bills, staff costs for senior living facilities for £388,000. What would need to happen in order for us to recover those costs is to increase service charges by 15%, but utilities charges would have to go up by 110%, which is obviously huge. And we do recognise that this level of increase is unaffordable for those senior living tenants. So instead, what we are proposing is a stepped approach over 5 years to work towards the position of full recovery. And we will review it every year to check where we are. So the 24-25 proposal is to increase utilities by 20%, the utility charge, and that will take it from £26 per week to £31.20 per week. The service charges will increase by 15%, which is £20.90 up to £24.04 per week. So you might not be able to see that because it does look tiny, or I don't know if it's just because I'm not wearing glasses. But so what I've done there is I've just shown how that will impact the average tenant. So as said, the additional cost per year for the average tenant for the weekly rent increase will be 800. Is that 800? So I'm going to have to look off this screen because I can't see. Is £602.10, slight difference. Yeah. And the service charges is an impact of £163.30 per year. And the heating charges will be an additional £270.40 per year. What that means is that if you're a senior living tenant and you're on an average rent that we've assumed, you would have an impact of around £1,035 per year from these increases. Thank you. Thank you. So we did touch on debt. So as Annalisa mentioned, in 2012, we took out the £189 million loan that we were required to take out by the government in order to purchase homes, which we did. I think we already thought were ours. But so the business plan was set to repay that borrowing over the next 18 years, and it's due to complete in 2040-41. But due to subsequent government rent policy changes, like the -1% that we spoke about, which would have taken tens of millions of pounds out of the business plan, if not hundreds of millions of pounds. The inflation that we've seen, so last year, for example, 10.1% inflation was had to be applied to the majority of our contracts across the housing schemes, and that's about £2.5 million that it impacted us by just in that 1 year. And because of that, our aim to become debt-free in that period is no longer possible without additional borrowing. And as I think I mentioned in previous slides, at the 7.7%, over the next 7 years, we will have to take out additional borrowing of £23 million. And that's 2.3 million required in 24-25. So this graph just shows you the debt reprofiling that we're going to be undertaking. Thank you. So the blue line there is the original repayment plan, and the orange line there is what we're planning to do now. We're reprofiling debt. And what you can see is it pretty much just pushes it down the road a little bit, basically. So in those years of unaffordability over the next 7 years, you see where the orange is much lower than our planned repayments, which is the blue line. We are able to catch up to paying our normal repayments based on our current forecasts, and it just pushes the high level of borrowing out for a few years. Overall, we still repay within the same period. It's just that we have to change that repayment within that period. So that's that table. I think this is a duplicate. I already spoke about capital works, but it includes, so the 9.6 million I mentioned earlier is going to include 4.9 million of planned work, such as boiler replacements, kitchen and bathroom replacements, £500,000 on roofing works, 1.5 million on fire safety works, and a number of others that are detailed in Annex 5 of the report. So within the report, within the annexes, you'll see a number of growth items are proposed for 24-25. And this includes a number of new staffing posts. So this is 4 new offices in the housing management team, 4 new offices in the repairs and maintenance team, a new complaints officer, and 3 new posts within the development team, as well as some staff support for the proposed replacement of Orchard. Now, all of this staffing is to address a lot of the concerns that are ongoing with contracts such as Ian Williams, our compliance, health and safety, damp and mould. So there's a need to grow the resource in order to try and catch up in terms of our performance and also make sure that we're keeping our homes safe. So just a few other notes. Detailed in Annex 6 is our proposal for the housing delivery scheme. So we've got a number of high-value delivery schemes going through, such as Oxford Ridge and the Chiddingfold schemes, delivering a number of new homes. So for next year, that's going to result in spend of £15 million. Fees and charges in the housing area are, again, proposed to be increased by inflation of 4.5%. Working balances. So our working balances within the HRA, we have to keep a minimum of £2 million. And that's there to safeguard us against any emergencies that might come in during the year. We've previously, in the previous years, always been way above that level and been pretty safe and comfortable in where we are. But 24-25 will take us right down to the limit of that minimum balance. So we are at the point that there is no more, the HRA has tons of money. That's been the previous narrative. That's not the case. We don't have a lot of money and we don't have a lot in reserves. So the growth items, as I said, they total 2.2 million, which is pretty much equivalent to the 7.7% rent increase that we're suggesting. I think that was in earlier, wasn't it? And that's it. So open to questions.
I had breakfast with my mum this morning. She lives in social housing in Guildford in Belfields, because I knew I was having this meeting today, and I wanted to kind of rehearse some of the things that we'll be talking about in this. And when you see some of those numbers, and the executive as a whole has been through those numbers now with the finance team many, many times, because almost always we don't want to put rent up at all. And then we have to balance that against, I mean, the thing I hear most is the issues with responsive repairs, particularly that dominates most of my mailbox. In fact, I did a quick check of my mailbox for the last quarter, and approximately 1/3 of all the emails and messages I get are in regards to responsive repairs and issues with social housing maintenance. And those are some of the reasons why you'll have seen those growth items in there, to try and redress that. I think I've said at previous meetings that if I had the power and the money to do so, I would bring all of that maintenance back in house. And that is something that over the fullness of time working with Guildford, I am intending to explore more thoroughly. But I am very keenly aware of some of the issues, and I can assure you, I imagine, Terry, as much as you may have some issues with this, you're probably not going to put them quite the same way my mother did this morning. So I will now hand over to you, Terry.
Thank you, Paul. The first thing I need to say is that I think the paper that put forward Candice is very good, very clear in why you need to do it, and I don't really need to sit here and say and challenge that at all. I can't challenge the reasons for doing it. All I can do really is to put my feelings as a tenant as to where we are now. Your paper presented today clearly lays out the factors with and beyond the control of housing services. It mentions, amongst other reasons, the changing in demand for services, new legislation, which has arisen through a history of some landlords failing to provide an acceptable service to tenants. Not something that I'm suggesting that Waverley have been in that background. My understanding whilst reading the paper is that housing services has become restricted by government restrictions on rent increases for several years. We are now in catch up alongside with a need to plan for future legislation, including housing and including housing designs and developments. The new legislation that requires landlords to address issues on damp and mould without delay is a welcome development for many tenants. The urgent need to replace the Orchard IT system as a priority, which is apparently at a point of failure. An expected cost currently, I believe, at 2.4 million over 7 years, with a 900,000 pull on the budget for this next year. The damp and mould issues with landlords and tenants has been here for many years, along with failure of regular planned maintenance, stock management, outdated management systems, the 38% on the take on our income to pay off a loan committed by Waverley. All of this really is not the tenant's fault. The new legislation that is here to protect us is not the tenant's fault. It's because of a failure in the past. Tenant satisfaction has shown a drop in tenants' perception, and it is perception, but it's perception on the service provided since 2017. And I think my figures are probably quite near it, but 83 on satisfaction in 2017, down to recently 68, but we've had a little bit of a turn up of by 1% in the last few months. And although the service does show a very slight increase in tenant satisfaction, there are further drops in antisocial behaviour, Waverley being easy to deal with, Waverley's contributions to tenants' neighbourhood, the well-being. Over half of our tenants, 55%, report that they are generally concerned about the cost of living and will be further to live with the increase. And slightly more, that 34% are slightly concerned. Now, I would say that you put those figures together, because if you're slightly concerned, you're concerned. Although tenants' satisfaction with housing repairs has improved, it is still well down on 2017. Tenant members continue, as Paul has said, to receive issues from the tenant members have received issues from tenants on delays addressing repairs, forgetting repairs, missed appointments, communications. I met yesterday with a tenant who raised an issue on work that had been completed in his home. And despite being told many times, someone will get back to you, it's taken 3 months for an officer to attend that and view that work. And the officer looked at it, and his words were, "This is rubbish." Delays in home upgrades with senior living tenants telling me that kitchen replacements that were expected in 2020 are now put forward to 2026. And we are currently in a low level of satisfaction in our service, with no comments coming from housing services and on improving the service. The demands on tenants' income, potential rise in living costs, and this is a hard sell for tenants, and I find that very difficult to support this particular proposal. Thank you.
Let me just ask a couple of questions, Candice. Could you just talk a little bit about the support for residents who are in hardship if they're put into a position with these increases?
Yeah, so we have substantially increased our hardship fund from £30,000 to £200,000 to address these kinds of issues. So they would come to the rents team. But Annalise will tell you more about the detail of it. There are also a few other schemes. There are discretionary housing payments, and we have a few different schemes that if you come to the council, we can support you with.
Yeah, so you may remember that we adopted, when we got the HRA hardship fund, we brought the HRA hardship policy to you about how we would use that money. And we found in the first year that people, we felt that people had got the message that rent was a priority debt. So our rent income team weren't actually speaking to people because they were paying their rent, but they were still in financial hardship. So we did a bit of a flip, and we did a proactive payment to everybody who was in our least energy efficient homes last year. This year, we've seen a bigger uptake in the HRA hardship fund. We've been using it to support people with their heating costs, people who've had their gas capped, or people with damp and mould. We've been providing additional money to help them run the heating and dehumidifiers. We've also been supporting new tenants with carpet to make sure the home is warm when they move in. And the rents team are very proactive at working with tenants. And over the last year, they've been using the Household Support Fund, which was distributed by Waverley from a national fund. And that's been very successful in working with tenants. So we recognise that the Household Support Fund would probably disappear. And we wanted to make sure that we'd got the resources to help people.
Any comments, Danielle?
Given that universal credits and the benefits in this country, there's been a lot of reports about how they're actually not enough to live on anyway. And what you've written about the extra Monday in the year, will you be using that fund to offer that extra week to be covered to those people on universal credits as standard before they come to you?
This is one of the most ridiculous things you're going to hear. Do you want to do this one, or shall I? Yeah.
No, I did read that you said that you can't give a rent-free week, but what I mean is, don't give a rent-free week, but can you give the money to cover that as standard? Does that make sense?
I think the complexity is with universal credit, we've covered it so that everybody who's currently on universal credit, we've got enough money to pay everybody that full week. But to actually proactively do that would potentially be very unfair because people move on and off universal credit. They may get full credit, they may only get partial credit, which is why we feel that it needs to be in consultation with the tenant, with the rent account officer. So that they will be talking about their monthly payments, the direct debit, if there's an issue, and then we'll be able to support that way rather than a blanket give everybody money for a free week. We'd rather target it more effectively because some people on universal credit, their income goes way up and then way down. And if you looked at the whole year, then they would have enough money to pay their rent quite reasonably. But maybe their job's seasonal or that type of thing. So there's just too many factors involved in those 300.
Isn't there also an issue that if we gave everybody the money, the government would recalculate their base as well anyway, so they wouldn't get it really?
Yep. So we need to look at it as a hardship fund rather than. Otherwise, it looks like we're getting around saying we're giving them a rent-free week by giving them money back, and that could be risky. But instead, what we're saying is we recognise it's going to possibly cause you to go into hardship depending on how your universal credit works. And it's there, it's a safety net, it's there to support you. But what we won't do is proactively hand it out for all the reasons that Annalisa said, but also so that we're not looking as if we're giving a rent-free week, which they might have to then declare and would get reduced from their universal credit again.
I'm sorry, Danielle, please.
So what communications will you have with people to show that it is available so that they know that they can come to you and because of this silly week business?
Okay. Yes, I mean, we'll be including information in the rent increase letter. And then, as you know, we have a tenant newsletter that we publish twice. As I say, all the officers are aware of the hardship fund. Just over the last month, even the inspectors have been coming forward with cases for people to get support. I think as we go further into it, and now we're in the second year, people know about it more, and I think we've had this conversation before, word of mouth is so much better than us sending a letter or a newsletter. We're putting the information out there, but unless it gets to you at the point in time when that's what you're dealing with, you kind of sometimes miss it. So yes, we'll be doing a lot of proactive work to make sure people know it's there. But the main way that we're using the hardship fund, and I think this will be the way it continues, is it's when we're working with tenants and so tenants don't have to ask for support. We're working with them, we recognise their hardship, and then we volunteer to help them.
I also asked the comms team to work with housing to come up with some further communications that come out, because I think with the raises that are being proposed this year, the possibility of people needing the hardship payments is going to increase, or at least we should be prepared for the very, very real possibility that it will. So I have asked Ian and the team to get in touch with you, Annalisa, about. So we're going to have a few new platforms coming online, like Commonplace and a few other things soon that will allow us to get more information out. But also be keen to ensure that places such as food banks and other areas that can signpost appropriately, CAW, things like that, have the literature that we're going to be producing for the rent letters so that they can be signposted properly. I know they do get versions of this anyway, but yeah. Any other comments? Yes, please do, sorry.
Thank you for that. I mean, my other concern really is that those on credit income are almost protected. It's those young families in 2-3 bedroom homes that have got a limited income, but above the threshold to get credits, and they're the people that we're going to drag back. We're going to drag them into credits in the future, or those that are really going to be on the breadline, and are really concerned about that.
Yeah, and as I said, I think, you know, we have to do it on a case-by-case basis, and there will always be, you know, unfortunately, the society we live in, there are always people who have got hardship and will potentially suffer because of that. But the reason we're looking for the rent increase is to make sure that we can tackle some of the other things that are causing them hardship and impacting their well-being. We want to make sure homes are safe. We need to have the resources to make sure we're tackling damp and mould effectively. We want to make sure we've got the resources to support people to live in their homes without antisocial behaviour, and building stronger communities.
If I can just add as well, I think just to say as well, we've got £200,000 there. If in year we're finding that obviously we're having a massive call on that hardship fund, we're absolutely able to move budgets to stop other things to make sure that we've got that safety net there. So it's not a one time and done sort of thing. But also I would say that to understand that it's such a delicate balance. It's very different to the general fund. There's a lot of things that we have to balance, and it's really hard to say 7.7, rent increase for people. But what otherwise is going to happen if we make that less is you're going to pay for it in the future. And you're going to pay for it by paying interest on debt that we're trying to avoid. So you're not going to get anything out of that. It's not even that it's for our, for our actually repaying our homes. It's just additional borrowing. So you're not going to get improvement to your homes. You're not going to get additional staff. We're not going to get improved repairs unless we avoid as much additional debt as we can. And that's where we're coming from on a financial viewpoint, is that I would recommend this purely so that you're not repaying and servicing a debt unnecessarily.
We're just going back to some of the other things that this rent increase is actually paying for as well. I mean, I was almost at the point of declaring an interest, because the reason I still have a respiratory issue today is because living in social housing in Guildford at 9 years old with black mold caused me to basically have asthma and other things. So, I mean, I very seriously take the issue of dealing with that, because young children exposed to it do end up with issues. So I think we just need to also, and I hope everybody here recognises that if we've got issues with damp and mould, we've got other issues with things like electrics, gas checks, kitchens and fit outs. We've got significant issues with responsive repairs. A lot of those issues could be dealt with more proactive fabric maintenance and various other things to the buildings. We actually want to try and cut down the need for responsive repairs in the first place, whilst also then providing officers and customer support for people who are having to deal with responsive repairs, which has clearly been a significant issue for the last couple of years particularly. There are quite a lot of good things in this rent rise that we need to do, both legally and to support the issues that we know we've got. Have we got any other comments? Danielle? Yeah.
I am broadly in agreement with less borrowing, because when you look at the pie chart, you can see how much we spend on borrowing, which is taking away from all the other services. So it's a shame that we have to do any additional borrowing and that can't start paying down that debt. However, there's always a however, there are a couple of things in here, particularly the senior living costs have gone up a huge amount. When you talk about recovery of the costs, does that mean recovery of the energy costs for that year or for the underfunding from previous years?
So it would just be for that year. We won't go back and try and charge those tenants for all the previous years of under recovery, because that could be a significant amount of money. So this is just ensuring that going forward we work towards full recovery. Yeah.
We're also in a situation, Danielle, where a lot of the individuals that we're talking about have been in receipt of and are still in receipt of energy support and other household payments. So I've taken an example of a lady who lives in senior living in the Holloway ward of Godalming, has been receiving something like £500 worth of energy support a year, which she doesn't need. She actually donates the whole lot to charity because she's a fairly wealthy woman and has been receiving it from the government anyway, because there's no means testing for it. Quite a lot of the individuals that we're talking about here, where if you take that 1,000 that it would end up being, if you had all of the components, including the senior living rise, almost anybody who is impacted by that complete set of things is in receipt of things that would negate that by sometimes as much as half anyway, straight up, without any support from us at all. So there are some nuances to this for quite a lot of the individuals involved. Anyway, my apologies, Danielle.
In terms of tenants' understanding, when you talk about the service charges, do they get a breakdown of what those service charges cover, how much is covered? Like with the council tax, how we get a bit of a breakdown there?
I might have to ask housing specifically what they get. They know what's included in that service charge, whether they have an itemised description. I doubt it because I've never been asked to provide it, but perhaps that's something we could look at providing going forward.
Well, I think if we can take an action then to check whether we have that, and if we don't have that, provide some kind of breakdown akin to the council tax pie chart and akin to the breakdown of the HRA pie chart, just to show what they're getting for that service charge. I think would be really informative. Thank you, Daniel. Okay.
I just really want to go back on what I said right at the beginning, is that I can understand why we need to do it, because there's the point in doing it, and we probably need to do it. It's just this, we've got to sell this to tenants, and I'm not sure how you're going to do that. Thank you.
My suggestions in terms of selling it to tenants, we need to, I think we're taking Danielle's point, we do need to have additional comms. It does need to be a bit more granular about showing what you get for that. I think we need to be specifically showing some of the content in a different way than slides, but in some form showing we're responding to things like mold and issues with tenants' repairs with some of the things that are coming in this rent rise, because we can't do them for free. I'm not entirely sure people love the idea of, I mean, it's a very good reason, but it's not exactly great for residents to hear that the reason that we're increasing your rent is because we're trying to decrease our debt and mortgage and repayments. It just doesn't sit well. It might be true, but it doesn't ever land particularly well. So I think we need to be very clear about what people are getting for that. Without drifting too much into the political, I also would be very keen for people to understand why we're in the constraints that we're in, because many of the things that we in this side of the place would want to do, we cannot, because we're restrained by the government in 50 different ways. I think we also need to just pick up specifically on responsive repairs and the fact that we're bringing in more people to address complaints, to make sure that we're dealing with that, and also to make sure that we're trying to reduce the need for responsive repairs. And then finally, stressing the avenues of support if you're in hardship. I don't know about you, Terry, but a lot of the tenants I meet tend to be people who will literally get down to their last pound before they go and seek help. We're also into a situation where quite a lot of the people who are now seeking help have absolutely never had to seek help before and don't know how to get it. And are in some cases quite embarrassed about the fact that they're in that situation. So it's probably labouring the point more than we normally do about the level of hardship support that's available, as well as getting the signposting out. Any further comments about this, particularly about things that we could do to make sure that tenants get what we're doing here? Danielle?
Well, just to echo Terry's point really as well, you know, there needs to be improvement to go with it. And obviously that's what you're all striving for anyway. But hand to hand, they need to be able to see that they're getting something out of their money. And that Joseph Rowntree report recently, you know, poverty levels are on the increase. So things are getting hard for people. The hardship fund, I think, is going to get more and more used, and people need to see that the money that they pay, they are getting something back for it.
My actual worry as well is, and we've seen this in a few other places, is that the existence of the hardship fund is not being used by people that clearly need it. I mean, I talk to people at the food bank down in Farncombe, for example, and there are people who have never heard of any of the things that they could get in terms of help, but they clearly need it. So my hope is that if these things are actually, if they exist, people are aware of them enough that they use them, and it's them not using it that's giving me most concern at the moment. Any further comments? Alan?
Just a very quick comment, following on, particularly with the senior people, you know, my age and above, you know, the very limited income they've got, and the fact that they're such proud people very often. And also, as you quite rightly said, they very often have never had to seek assistance. They don't really know how to do it. I think we're going to have a very, very big task in order to really concentrate on those people. I know rent arrears went up last year, towards the end of last year. I don't know how much of that was amongst the senior people, you know, but my big worry is that a lot of people sort of in their 80s just aren't aware of hardship funds and would be too proud to ask for it. They'd rather cut down on food than actually sort of go and say, you know, I can't pay my rent.
Tend to find they cut down on heating and things like that as well, which is obviously a subsidiary issue. The one thing I would say is that with the senior living residents, because they are vulnerable in other ways as well, we're usually more aware of them and their particular issues, and it does mean that we engage with them in other ways than we do with regular tenants. Do we do anything? Will we be doing anything specific for senior living resident tenants as a result of these changes?
So those in senior living facilities, obviously where we've got staff that go out on site, we will make sure that they're well aware of what we've got. But obviously there are a number of senior residents that don't live within those facilities. So I think what we'll need to address and make sure is in the comms plan is how we make sure we're getting that information to those tenants. And that may well be as well linking up and letting services like social services, etc., all those support services know that that's there. But I think that will be something that will be a strand of the comms plan.
Sorry, I wish that we had a leaseholder here, because I've got to say it's not an area that I understand a great deal about, but just looking at your charges for leaseholders, they just seem pretty much never ending and quite steep, you know, like, I don't know, 30 quid for a letter and stuff. I feel like I'm going to a solicitor, I don't know. But it's just, there's one where it says, you know, just a check up to see everything's okay, and that costs, it just feels like there are a lot of charges in there in general. They've gone up 4.5%, but they were quite steep anyway. It would be nice to have a leaseholder here to discuss this, but in the absence of them, are they going to be a group that's going to find difficulties as well?
So that, yeah, the charges that we have in there, they are all based are based on hourly rates and what it costs for our staff to offer that service. So what we're really conscious of is that rent payers don't subsidise leaseholders, you know, in having an office, especially there. And we do have offices that are especially there for leaseholders, etc., to do letters, to do all those correspondence. So take your point that they're higher charges. I have to say I don't know too much of the detail, but I think what we could commit to is to make sure that for the next budget round we fully review the leaseholder charges and make sure that they're costed out per staff time, admin fees, those types of things, so that we've got the basis and evidence of those costs. But it is so that we don't have rent payers subsidising the cost of an officer's time spent on leaseholder letters.
Also, 30 quid might seem a lot for a letter, but when it's some of the outside versions of this, the commercial versions of the same thing, that is still relatively cheap. The exec took a decision in terms of how we presented fees and charges. We wanted to make sure that for things that impacted people like tenants and leaseholders and this sort of end of the spectrum, the inflationary rises were about the most we could justify. I don't know whether you've got the full budget pack there or just the HRA bit, but if you were to look, for example, at developers with trying to build more than 200 houses and things like that, you will see the charges were vastly increasing on inflation. So we're trying to make sure that those doing things that represent people that can afford to do that sort of work are charged accordingly, and that we try not to put any additional burden on tenants or leaseholders than inflation where possible.
But should it cost 40 quid to say, can I have a pet? I mean, that's steep.
I think in this case, it's because it's a complete change of conditions, and it does require legal time and it does require officers' time. That is still probably not recovering the cost of the officers and legal time, even at that level, because it does require legal changes to a lease. I'm privately renting, and I asked for a modification just to change the date I pay my rent, and they charged me £90 for it. So, I mean, it is that sort of thing I do sympathise with, but ours are not that bad.
I guess the thing was then, in that case, we maybe need to make sure that they are aware of, because they could also end up in difficulties. You know, they're just another group that is going to get squeezed. And so, you know, make sure that they're aware of the hardship loans, the hardship funds and such like that are there.
Do we communicate with leaseholders in the same way as we do with tenants in general? I mean, I'm not actually familiar with any. Do we do any different communications or any communications for leaseholders?
Yeah, we have a very small number of leaseholders, and they are historically they used to get homes and people, but I think that kind of fell by the wayside because it wasn't relevant to them in the same way. However, we do have communications for everybody living in I hate the word blocks, but you know, kind of buildings with different flats in, and also they we contact them every year to talk to the formal consultation about their service charge and the charges and fees that they owe us. And then also we contact them if we're doing works to their properties. So yeah, it's similar communications, but we don't do the tenant newsletter in the same way. It's more information for people living in the block of flats that they get that information.
Okay, any further comments? So what we would normally do here is I would be asking you to support a recommendation as to whether the Landlord Services Advisory Board supports the decision that's being put to full council. My feeling of the meeting, and Terry, do correct me if you disagree with this, is that although there is a full acknowledgement that the charges are high, there is an understanding of what they're needed for, but also I think a requirement to ensure that residents understand or are told the full granularity of what they get for that raise and full communications about the access to hardship. So rather than putting a recommendation that says you support a 7.7% rise, I would actually suggest that we merely record the comments that have been made today to go alongside the full council commentary, so that all Waverley members, when they're voting on the budget, know your full comments, rather than just seeing a line that says you do or do not support the raise. I think the comments will be more helpful and instructive to members than me trying to artificially bully you into agreeing something like that. Terry?
Yes, I agree. I don't think we would be bullied, but
tried to sort my mum, you see, so it didn't work.
When you look at the room, I think we've only got 3 people that are eligible to vote anyway. So
as far as I'm concerned, everybody here is eligible to have a view on this.
But yeah, I'm sure they've got views. But yeah, I'm happy to go with that. Rob is the only other one from the tenant panel that is here that has a vote, or has that. But your opinion, if you're happy with that.
Is that for the 7.7 then?
Yeah. So if I can just, I'll articulate my proposal then, so you can see if this is something you agree with, that if we take all of the comments made regarding the 7.7 that have come out of this meeting, and Layla, Annalisa, Candice and I will review all of the comments made. We'll then put a statement together that I will send to Terry so that it can be reviewed and agreed. And that statement will then be part of the pack that comes to full council for members to review on the budget. I don't think you saying yes or no is appropriate, but all of the comments that you've made on all of the aspects of the raise are the things that would assist members most in coming to a determination. And I will make sure that comes to you before it's sent around to full council. That be acceptable?
Yeah, you accept that, Rob?
Well, I think the tenants panel will need to discuss it before.
Oh yes, no, you can, yeah. As far as I'm concerned, that's fine. Yeah.
We definitely need to put it to our members again, don't we, Terry?
Yes, I think so. But also, it's a case that if there is any give in that 7.7%, that's reviewed at least.
I think I need to be realistic on that point. The give on the 7.7, if we were reducing it, it would increase costs materially, and we would have to not do some of the things that we clearly need to do. So, I mean, from my point of view, I'll be upfront with you. I will be going into that full council session. I will be presenting all of your comments, but I will be suggesting to members to vote for 7.7 because I think we need to improve the service, and that's the only way we can do it. It will actually materially degrade if we don't raise that level of funding.
Agreed, and then I would ask that is actually made quite clear that we are expecting a better service.
I will add my own comments, pretty much as I've said to that, to what is sent to you to discuss with the tenants panel. Yeah, Annalisa.
Yeah, I just following our conversations at the chairman's briefing and after your tenant panel consultation, I think just for you to consider whether you do want to make a suggestion of 6 or 7, so you say the tenants panel understand the circumstances you're in. However, you may or you may not want to do that, but as in addition to the comments, because I know you were very mindful about what messaging you were going to give to tenants as the tenant panel. So you just want to potentially give that a little bit more thought.
prepared for that.
You're already prepared.
Yes, I think that, you know, from a as a tenant group, we would not support the 7.7, but we did consider that a lower rate of possibly 6% would be a better issue.
So I will commit now to the council providing a summary of the comments from councillors and from tenants panel members and officers at this from this meeting. A reply to the suggestion of 6%, which will include a summary of what that difference means financially and in terms of services. And we will also commit to the communications, hardship fund communications and granularity of service charges and the various other things that we've agreed at the session. Okay, any final comments before I move on to the last item, before myself and Joe have to go and do the council's pay negotiations as well? No, okay, in which case I'm going to move on to item 7. In fact, actually considering the time and having had prior discussion with you, because I have to be at the council's pay negotiations, I'm now going to hand over to Terry to chair the rest of the meeting. And if I can elevate poor Alan as the only other councillor here to be vice chair pro tem, you're going to have to be that, Terry. All right. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you. I suggest I just stay where I am. I don't need to sit in the bigger chair. I don't actually need it. But so if we go on to item 7, and this is the procurement update.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to let the Landlord Services Advisory Board know that there's 2 papers going to the executive on the 6th of February to enter into some new contracts. Within the timings, that there wasn't an opportunity to bring the full paper to Landlord Services Advisory Board, so just wanted to give you a verbal update. The first one is kind of on the periphery of the Landlord Services Advisory Board remit, but just to let you know that we're looking to enter into a new insurance contract for our leaseholders. It's been very challenging to actually find a provider who will insure leasehold properties for the council. So that's going to, we've found a provider. It's just over £100,000, which makes it a formal, a key decision, which is why it's going to executive on the 6th of February. And the second item, which I think you'll be much more excited about, is the social housing decarb fund. So this is to make our homes more efficient. We've put a bid in for, I think it's just short of 250k to do fabric first improvements to our homes, to the 100 least most energy efficient. So we've put the bid in. We're expecting to get news on whether we were successful or not at the end of March. If we are successful, we need to hit the ground running. So the paper is asking permission for us to enter into a contract with E.ON, who helped us with our submission, and then commence the works. So fingers crossed for everything at the end of March. So those were just the 2 procurements I wanted to let you know about.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, so we'll move on to item 8 and back to Annalise again.
Okay, so as you're aware, Andrew Smith, the Executive Head of Housing, left Waverley and Guildford at the end of December. So we wanted to make sure that you as key stakeholders had an update of what was happening. So Annie Wrighton, the Strategic Director, unfortunately can't join us today, but she has sent a statement. So I'm going to put my reading glasses on and just go through it. Okay, so she said, I am looking at interim arrangements across the 2 boroughs as the executive head is a joint post. I was delighted with the level of interest in taking on additional duties. I have had informal conversations with a number of officers who reported to Andrew Smith directly. So this is to look at interim arrangements. Those conversations have raised a range of suggestions and thoughts for consideration, and also raised some issues which need resolving in the short term. I will be talking to those involved in due course and making the necessary arrangements for interim cover. The advert for the full-time post is due to go out on the 25th of January in the Municipal Journal. The post is a challenging one with lots of opportunities, and I would hope that we get a good response. So watch this space and we'll give you more updates as and when we get them.
Thank you. Any further questions? Or any questions? No. Good. So we'll go on to the work programme, Annalise, and I've just got one to add. I think in the past we have said that with the senior living centres that do their survey, that the results would come back, and I believe that's now been completed. So hopefully we could bring that forward for the next month. Shouldn't be a particular time-consuming issue.
Forgive me because I don't actually have the work plan in front of me, which is a real omission of mine. But I believe it is due to come in February anyway. Yeah, okay. My other suggestion was that I bring forward that the government are consulting on AWAB's law, which is new requirements and legislation around damp and mould. So I thought it would be good to bring that consultation piece of work at the end of February as well. And then I think you've referred to the tenant satisfaction measures. You quoted them in some of the information when we were discussing the rent increase. We're getting the final set of information from our market research company shortly, and I want to present them to Landlord Services Advisory Board, but I think it might be more meaningful for us to have a closed session where we share that information, and then we will come back to Landlord Services Advisory Board with an action plan. Unfortunately, Joe had to step out, but we're looking to for a date in February. So we will be in contact about sharing that data with you.
Thank you. That's good. And also with the damp and mould, could we have some sort of feedback on what's been done in the last 6 months or whatever it is?
Yeah, absolutely. Delighted that our damp and mould officer started a week last Monday. So we've got somebody in place now. We're doing a handover for the action plan, and she's learning all our systems and processes and getting up to speed, and will be responsible for keeping track of all the cases.
Thank you. Any other suggestions? Members have had the opportunity to look at our plan for the next year. Anything else you want to add?
Sorry, I can't help myself. I don't know any child who ever thought, I want to grow up and be the damp and mould officer. But that's one heck of a job title.
Very exciting post, yeah. Thank you. So no extras? So we're happy with the work plan. Thank you. I'm sure it'll be reviewed next month and we can add more anyway.
Yes, absolutely. Where committees are going to put in the dates for the next year, and once we've got those dates, we can help. That will help plan the work plan a bit more effectively.
Put that on. Is the date the next meeting, which is the 29th of February at 10 o'clock, and it should be here. Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. Nobody else want to add anything while they're here?